I'm actually drunk right now. I'm not, I'm just tipsy. So today, I want to talk about one of the biggest struggles that I think a lot of startups face early on, which is building initial traction or getting traction quickly enough. And I think part of this is due to the fact that it's hard to find the right motivated people early on when we're just getting started. So today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the steps that we took at Venngage to try and find these motivated people, and hopefully by the end of today, you guys will have a better team and a more motivated team overall. So there's this great TED Talk by Daniel Pink called The Puzzle of Motivation. And I'd never really given much thought to motivation until I started managing people, because I thought it was, one of those BS things where everybody talks about motivating people. I'm like, yeah, whatever, they'll figure it out. But he actually made me think a little bit more about motivation, especially when I got more people. And I started to realize that every single person is very complex in what they want, and everyone needs kind of a customized, personalized approach to being motivated. So in his talk, he breaks down motivation into 3 things: autonomy, the urge to direct one's own life; mastery, the desire to be better at something or get better at something; and purpose, which is this need to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. So in a lot of early companies, the first few hires are usually what we call intrinsically motivated, right? They're usually fueled by this purpose or this desire to just get results and be better. But as a company grows, it becomes harder to find these intrinsically motivated people, and most people are actually extrinsically motivated, meaning they're more fueled by things like money or security or esteem, right? As we grow and we continue to hire more of these extrinsically motivated people, new pain points and new problems start to come across our lives as well, right? And what happens is that pain kind of grows along with our growth, and we start to figure out that, just doubling the size of our team isn't actually going to lead to double the revenue, which is something that we learned last year. So hopefully today what I can help you guys learn is how to address some of these pain points early on so that you can continue to grow at that same positive rate without letting the pain follow. I don't want to talk too much about some of the strategies that are required to hire great marketers or great growth professionals. I think some of the other speakers are going to cover that as well, and Lucas, you kind of talked about that. Instead, I want to talk more about how to train growth-mindedness and autonomy into your employees so that they're actually continuously motivated and contributing to your vision and making it become a reality. Because I usually do a 45-minute talk on this, and if I talk for 45 minutes, I'm sure I will never get invited back to TechTO. So I'm only going to cover one major point, which is encouraging job ownership in the people early on and allowing that to become part of your culture. So one of the main things, what I mean by making ownership part of your culture, is really making it part of your core values. Because really your core values are the backbone of your organization and of your culture overall. So these are some examples of a few great company core values that you guys can follow. I'll tweet this out later. I don't have too much time to talk about it. But ownership is one of the main things that I think everyone should really focus on. And at Venngage, we have 5 prominent core values. And ownership really kind of ties everything together, and that's one of the things at the forefront of our company. And what each team does and each department does is they actually define these core values and what it means to have ownership across the company for your specific tasks or what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And part of that is really, in order to create accountability and ownership, you really need to develop specific goals and milestones for each individual contributor on your team. And part of this is not necessarily just, it's setting the what and the why for what those goals mean, but not necessarily the how. Because if you don't provide the how, you actually empower people to start thinking outside the box and actually problem solving on their own without just coming to you and expecting you to hold their hand along the way. So when you're setting these goals and milestones for different people, it's important to avoid ambiguity. So here's an example goal, improve customer retention by 5%. Has anyone ever been given a goal like this? One person, okay, great. Everyone else works for an amazing company. So a goal like this is a little bit hard to wrap your head around, right? Somebody who doesn't necessarily have the strategic context isn't going to understand how to break this down. So as a leader or a manager, the job is really to break that down and to make it a little bit more tangible so that somebody can wrap their heads around it and have a specific number that they can try to influence. So an example might be, me as a leader, I might find that, people who talk to support are actually a lot more likely to come back to our product. So I might give a person on my team the specific goal of, go and try to get more people into support, because that way we can actually measure it. It's a lot more specific. You can think of specific experiments to get people into that funnel, and I know that ultimately will increase retention. So as you're thinking about all these goals, you're really trying to break them down into inputs that become more and more tangible that you can pass on to specific people on your team and give them an area to own. And it might take a lot of time to break it down, but eventually that last layer becomes what you assign to different people. Because ultimately, creating a culture that inspires ownership is quite challenging to do, but I think it's something that every leader should be focusing on actively, because if you continue to focus on growth of your people, eventually you'll actually see the growth of your revenue as well. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's my handle, and I wrote a much more in-depth post on all of this stuff. That's the link, and yes, Drunk Entrepreneurs, just Google that, you'll find it. I think I went overtime.
All right. Everybody up. Clap as loudly as you like that talk. Who wants another 41 minutes of that? Yes. Okay, we'll take 2 questions. The audience did want another 41 minutes, but we're taking 2 questions.
So you've hired someone, you're working with them, and they're great at the beginning, they start to fall off. What kind of things can you do to re-engage and get someone from maybe considering to not stick around to be more, like what are the tactical motivation techniques, maybe 1 or 2 that you've used before that you've seen work?
First of all, that was the most articulate question I've ever been asked. I know, I understand what you're saying. So they come in, they're really motivated, and they seem to be doing a good job at first, but then later on they kind of seem to fall off the bandwagon, right? Usually I find that that's an issue with clarity of specific goals that they're not actually accountable for. In the past, I've actually tried to create more levels of management, and I realized that it was a lot more difficult to do. So as soon as I started managing people myself again and making sure that the goals are really specific and they had kind of like this bounding box to play within, right? You want to set limitations for people, but you don't want them to scribble outside the line. So I think that by giving people this kind of like this area where they can run free, but it's kind of structured, is one of the best ways to provide ownership without losing what you need them to do. Does that help your question? Okay.
Nadia, just a question over here.
I'm not, okay, I see you.
At the beginning, you were talking about who you look for. You had a really clear criteria and it made a lot of sense. I guess at an interview, how do you assess any of that? How can you filter at that stage so you land to those criteria?
Yeah, so I think a lot of our interview is actually similar to what Lucas talked about. We actually interview predominantly on core values. I rarely look at skill development. In fact, half the time people come in for an interview and I don't even know what their resume is. And I think last year I was like talking to someone on my team, I'm like, you have a master's? And he was like, I've been working here for 3 years. And I was like, no, whatever. But it's really like we have specific core values. So we have 5 core values. We have sets of questions for each of those core values, and I'm looking for very specific things. They're usually quite subjective, and most of our team understands what the outcome's going to be. But ultimately, we're just looking for people who are going to be a fit and who are going to enjoy working there, and they're trying to grow as well. And usually when we have a hesitation about hiring somebody, that's a no. We have multiple people hiring or interviewing people at the company. Our interview's about 3 hours. And unless it's a unanimous yes, we don't hire them.
Thank you.